find it kind of ironic that I'm moderating a session on projection and media design, because I kind of dropped out of the projection and media design aspect of things around 1995. My company in New York, Production Arts, was the exclusive distributor in the U.S. of two major projection companies, Ludwig Pani of Vienna, Austria, and then ETC, Audiovisual, different company than my current ETC. And so that's kind of what my connection is here. So I know some of the players here on our panel, and I'm just really happy to be connecting all you guys together. And I want to just point out that we've looked at the considerable bios of our panelists, Jeff Sugg, Wendall Harrington, and Bob Bonniol, in our Playbill program. So I don't think we need to go over that because we kind of have the top level view of their careers. But I'm sure we'll hear a lot more in the next 90 minutes. But I want to ask the panelists to kind of focus in this session on the art and the craft of working in this projection and media design space, with a view to what kind of skills did you need as professionals who've been in it for a long time to get into this? And more importantly, perhaps, for those students that are considering that they might want to get into this, what kind of skill set is important for them? So basically, if there's an underlying theme, it would be, what would you tell a student today who said, I want to get into the projection space? What do I need? I'd like to begin with, I'd like to ask all three of our panelists in turn to kind of tell us, how'd you get into this projection media space, and what led you there? Give us the highlights of your career in a 15-minute summary, and again, what kind of important attributes would you tell a student would be required to get into this space? Jeff Sugg, why don't we start with you?
Great, always great. Thank you for, and Wendell fucking gets up and leaves. Okay, no, I'm joking. It was too easy. So I went to undergrad to study biochemistry with a pre-med influence or pre-med intention. And I say that mostly because it's useful to remind me and as an extension, everyone else that's listening, that this isn't the last decision I'll ever make in my life, and going into theater was, while it was expressed intently, like how important it was for me to consider that I needed to do this as opposed to just wanted to do this. There's still time. But so I did that for 2.5 years. I walked into my biochemistry midterm and I said, these are the people I'm going to be spending the rest of my life with. And I turned around and walked out. And whether or not that was a wise decision in the moment, it was the decision that I made. And I went and to my, the guy who'd been teaching me directing classes at the time, and I said, I want to switch to theater and be a director. So I squeezed that in the last 1.5 years at school. And meanwhile, I learned really quick through like work study stuff, that being a technician, I could make money, right? Because that's what was paying my bills as a student, was working in the shop. And so I gained skills as an electrician and as a carpenter, and also was designing things because I was very interested in visually driven theater. some of the Polish folks from the 60s, and then the more American people who are doing that kind of thing were like Bob Wilson. And then I ended up going and working with a guy named George Coates in San Francisco, who did some crazy stuff with 3D projection, with slide projectors and film projectors and early SGI Spark machines, doing stereo graphics on a computer back when nobody was doing that. Anyway, so, but then I just kind of like designed every show I could get my hands on once I got out of school, went to San Francisco, worked for George Coates there, also worked for the San Francisco Mime Troupe and did their one and only multimedia design production, I think, unless they've done something else since then. And then went to New York with the intention of working at the Wooster Group. Meanwhile, I'd also come into contact with a now defunct theater company called Gale Gates that was doing sort of large scale ambulatory performances in a warehouse in Dumbo when there were still literally packs of wild dogs wandering that neighborhood. And then had a theater company with some other friends that was doing dance theater stuff, designed for dance. This was some light stuff, some scenic stuff, and then got a job at the Wooster Group as the technical director and then as the master electrician, and worked with Jennifer Tipton there as her master electrician. And then was always kind of doing these, including slide projection. I knew how to do early like dub dissolve programming for slide projector dissolvers. And then Dataton used to have software that did multi-platform tracks. So they would run DVD players and slide projectors and whatever else you wanted to hook up to it. So I got into all that stuff and kind of kept coming at it from a take the next technical job. And all of my existence was below 14th Street in New York. It was with the Wooster Group. It was with the Gale Gates company. It was then with my another collaborator named Cynthia Hopkins, and then with a company with Jim Finley and with George Richard Foreman. And it was just like all of these crazy downtown folks who were making this devised work. And what I got from that was like intense skills of collaboration and a willingness to speak up in a room about what my ideas were. And then those shows, some of them got bigger and toured the States and Europe, and some of them didn't. Some of those companies went away. Some of them are still around. But I tried to follow the art. And as Wendell, reminds me every couple of times I talk to her, like, Jeff, you've always followed the art and not the money. So just like do that. And it's, and what was easy about it for me for the first 15 years was like, there was never the probability of money on the table, right? For most of that work. So it's like, well, there's no money to follow, but eventually what happened for me was Moises Kaufman came and saw one of those shows and invited me to come collaborate on a piece with him. And he also works, or used to at least, I don't know what he's doing now, in a very sort of devised way. And so I made a piece with him that ended up going to big regional theaters. And so I got introduced to that world. And then it went to Broadway, and I had my first Broadway show, and I programmed it myself. And I was on a programmer's paint card because I wasn't in 829. I don't even know if there were many folks in 829 at that point. So anyway, all that to say, like, I just kind of like kept doing what I was doing and following this intense desire to just like keep making and keep making and keep making. And so the skills that I had were like a collaborator. The skills that I had were a willingness to do a lot of research, and Lincoln Center Library used to be the place to go for all of that. And you'd go and like sift through all those images and stuff. And then this sort of need to just keep staying up all night to do it differently. And it was hard. What I found, the thing that I take away from those early years was I was very unwilling to show, once I started transitioning from these fully collaborative devise sorts of things, where you just put it all on the table all the time and there was no shame about any idea. When I started shifting over into these more sort of standardized American styles of theater making, where you rehearse for 4 weeks and then do a tech and then put it up, which means as designers, you're like doing models or mock-ups. That was kind of a hard shift for me to do, because I felt like showing these early ideas was sort of like walking into a theater naked or something. I was like, I can't show you this early idea because it's not finished. So I want to finish it first and then I'll show it to you. And looking back, I feel like that was something that my work got so much better when I was willing to let that go and to put those early ideas directly to directors and other designers, and to be able to say, here's the raw material, let's keep making this better. And to lose the potential shame of having a bad idea. What I was basically, no one else was saying they were bad ideas. It was me saying that. But that's the kind of thing that I've learned to let go of over the years, and just kind of like take that collaborative skill that I had early and understand how to put it into these other forms of working.
Jeff, I have a question. I don't want to interrupt you.
But stop me from rambling, please.
No, you're not rambling. It's fascinating. But I'm struck by the fact that your career trajectory appears to have started out with a lot of nuts and bolts, hands on the wrenches kind of activity. And so, there's always that debate that I hear among young design students where mentors advise them, if you want to be a designer, be a designer. Don't fuck around with this electrician technical director stuff, right? So at what moment and how was there a moment where you suddenly said, hey, I'm no longer a technician, I am a designer on part of this collaborative team doing design work? How did that happen?
I don't think there was a moment, because I still take some jobs that are like, hey, help us figure out how to do this. And so I still do that kind of stuff. I just take much fewer of them, right? So they were how I made my money while I went out and got $750 or less to design a show at the New York Poets Cafe, or wherever. So I guess what happened was the design work started paying my way, and I didn't need the technical stuff to pay my way. It's maybe kind of how it went. Mm-hmm. But I think what also shifted for me is there, through life events, basically, there came a time when I realized, making theater isn't the most important thing in the world. And I shifted my approach to that. And that might be a little bit of when I stopped doing as much of that technical work. And I don't think there's a one-on-one correlation, but there was really a time when it was like, I can't continue to take all of my personal worth from my work as a theater maker. Because that turned out to be very dangerous for me. It kind of is what Bob was talking about at the beginning. Like, actually, here's what I've done. I've done the legwork and I can't control any of the rest of this. And I couldn't see that line very well. And so as that shift happened, it became a little easier for me to start seeing things that I was like, this is what I want to do. This is me being an artist and being true to that intention. And then this is me doing a job because I feel like I just have to take every job because I've been a freelancer since 1994. And that's what you do as a freelancer. You take every job ever. And that's I still haven't learned that lesson well, frankly. see Wendall smiling because there was a gig last year that was a very high profile job that I took because it was the right thing to do. And I knew deep down I didn't want to do it, but I took it anyway. And then I kind of made a mess when I got out of it. And don't advise it, don't advise that. But
it worked out fine. It worked out fine.
It did, but it worked out fine because I was honest and I like tried to behave with dignity and I didn't lie my way out of it and I didn't pretend like it was one thing when it was actually something else. And that's what the other thing I've learned is like you just can't play whatever game you think is playing. I've found that I just have to tell the truth and let the cards fall where they may. And that's a hard lesson for me to learn too. But I think what's, and what's kind of funny is that Moises Kaufman's show that I did was called 33 Variations. And I had known Wendall, we had exchanged emails, we had hired, she was asking me about hiring somebody and I gave her this person and that of course, whatever, it doesn't matter, but that's a different story. But I invited her to the dress rehearsal of that show. And the scenic designer for that piece, Derek McLean, was like, you invited Wendall to come see your dress rehearsal? Like this, and this is the first time you've met her? And I was like, yeah.
But I had with your negotiation, right? We had been having business.
That's true. We had been talking back and forth, but we never met each other face to face. And I was like, if she can't see what's going on with my work at a dress rehearsal, like if she can't tell that it's still a dress rehearsal, then I don't know what what the big deal is. But all that to say, I think it's important to just kind of like try to find that artist that you are and that I've slowly begun to accept that I am, and just stay true to that. And what that kind of journey is leading me to now is it turns out that that there's all these other things that I love to do, like including making things with my hands, and building, furniture and like taking metal rods and turning them into paper towel holders, and like all this crap that I love to do, and like getting a welder again so I can relearn how to do that since it's been a long time. And in my mind, it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to like become an Etsy artist and sell furniture, or I'm a projection designer, and it's like, turns out you can do all that. And knowing that I am an artist who has all of those things, and that's a little of what you're talking about, Steve. It's like, I am a projection designer. And for some people, I'm still a lighting designer. And for some people, I'm still a technical guy that comes in and figures out how to make a system run. And then, in my mind, I make furniture that I haven't really made yet. So there's all of these things that I feel like you can exist in all of these gray areas at the same time. It doesn't need to be this sort of black and white thinking for me.
It's really, really interesting.
All right.
We're going to come back to you, Jeff, and we're going to come back to, I want to hear from Bob and Wendall, but I'll just park on this side here. What, for all three of you, what level of technical involvement and expertise now is required to be in the projection space, let's say, compared to 10 or 20 years ago? Yeah. And we don't have to talk about it this second, but the reason I ask is, Jeff, you told me about a project you worked in Scotland a little while ago, and I kind of consider myself a reasonably technical person. My eyes were crossed 5 minutes into the discussion. I had no idea what you were talking about, and I thought, wow, something's happened in this projection space. So it was just interesting to discuss that. Yeah. But let's move on to Bob for a second. Bob, tell us about how you got into this and give us a little background on your career.
Well, I mean, hilariously, given the context of what we just heard from Jeff, I don't have a college degree. I attended several colleges and universities, but never quite made it through. And where I was at was I was in Providence, Rhode Island. I was studying political science. My aspiration was to become a crooked politician. It's a very, very honorable path to follow in Rhode Island. This is what kids from Rhode Island do. They set up successful corruption. So that was kind of where it was headed. And then by hook or by crook, in the summer of 1987, I found myself going to Trinity Repertory and seeking a job as a spotlight operator. And it's because I heard they needed one. I'm like, oh, how hard could that be? I needed another job. So I wandered into that theater, and the box office people were like, yeah, go talk to the head electrician. She's downstairs. And so I went into the downstairs theater, and I talked to her, and I lied. She said, have you done this before? I was like, oh, hundreds of times. And she handed me the color for the spots, which, of course, it was like a satellite or something. Right? It could not have been a simpler spotlight. So I came back to her about an hour later, and I said, well, I haven't put the color in this particular kind of spotlight. And she saw through me immediately, and she said, you have never been in a theater, have you? And I said, no. And I said, but this is my big break, and I've always dreamed of this, like just lie upon lie upon lie, right? Here is the irony. That show was tomfoolery. It was one of the last shows that happened at Trinity Rep with Adrian Hall as the artistic director. Because speaking of Worcester Group, just a little bit after that, Anne Bogart arrived to take over the theater. And subsequently, I was involved with like probably the 2 years of the most incredible theater I have done to this day. But so I began life as an electrician, right? And the head electrician, who is now my wife, but that's another complete story that would take a lot of time to talk about. But Colleen and I are now married and run the business together. Colleen taught me how to be a good electrician. And then I subsequently did a bunch of shows at Trinity, and again with Anne Bogart, that like, it did become my passion. Like, how could it not? How could you not work with Tina Landau and Anne Bogart and Robert Wilson and all of these people that came through there and not be profoundly affected if you were prone to that at all? And so I was. But, right from the beginning, one of my dreams was to go on tour. One of the things about Colleen that blew me away when I met her is she had arrived at Trinity Rep as the head electrician, and she had just come off the road with U2 and Bruce Springsteen. She was one of the very, very, her and Ann Militello and Abby Rosen Holmes were maybe the three women who were doing that back then. So I thought that was incredible, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to go do a rock and roll tour. And she would say, you're not good enough. Like, you're nowhere near good enough. So I kept working on it, and I worked my way up that ladder, right? I became an electrician. I became a pretty good electrician. Then I became a head electrician. Then by, say, 1991 or 1990, I had moved to New York City. Colleen had left Trinity. She dabbled in theater after doing rock and roll, and then decided she wanted to be a best boy and a gaffer. So she moved to Seattle because it was a film industry there at the time. So I moved to New York, where I would come toddling into Steve's Joint down on 11th Avenue, and I would pull shows. And something happened when I moved to New York. One, I saw what Guy Benjamin was up to. And I saw what, and I saw what Anne was up to with the Pawnee projectors and the PG projectors. And I thought that was amazing. I was, at the time, a master electrician for sort of non-union bus and truck musicals. But I really wanted to do that. And then, and I've said this to Wendall before, so I don't have a problem saying it again. Then my life changed, because I went and sat in the front row of the balcony and saw Tommy. And I was like, holy fuck, this is a new manner of expression for me. This is a hybrid form of cinema and theater. It appealed to me at every level, right? But I had a really good path going being an electrician. I eventually made it onto Broadway shows. I made it onto some really big shows. I ended up being the lighting director for Starlight Express in Las Vegas. And worked on Beauty and the Beast on Broadway. So I felt this tug, this creative tug. I knew that I wanted to be a designer, but it seemed completely impossible to me because it seemed that in theater, I had to have the degrees and I had to be part of sort of those networks of people that very sensibly come into being from the, which I think harkens back to a whole model of where you go study under a master, you apprentice, right? Mm-hmm. And then you build a practice. And I hadn't had that. So there seemed to be like the ceiling that I couldn't break through. Like it wasn't intuitive to go from being like a really great production electrician to being a lighting designer. There just wasn't many of those, right? Or any kind of designer. So the first thing that happened was that I crossed that Rubicon. I remember I was working on Martin Guerre, which was a terrible Broadway show. And I spent half the day pulling 4-aught under the show deck. And I came out at lunch, and I think the production electrician, I think it was Jimmy Maloney, maybe. And he's like, Bobby, what's wrong? And I'm like, Jimmy, I'm not supposed to be doing this. I'm supposed to be out there at the tech table. I'm supposed to be designing. And Jimmy said, well, Bobby, you got to fucking put your wrench down and go do it. And he was right. I needed to stop being a technician and go try to be that. And so I did. And so and right away I had some good luck. I got some lighting design experience in theater. I designed some shows at the Fifth Avenue Theater in Seattle, and I designed some lighting for some national tours. I think the first one was Victor Victoria. And that was very natural for me because I had come from being an electrician, but always alongside the vocation of lighting, I was experimenting with video. I was working with dance companies using a video toaster, to create video designs. I had some experience at this point with Connie and PG projectors on some of the shows I had. And so I did a couple of like very simple projection design things as well that were kind of integrated parts of the lighting design. And then Colleen and I got married, and Colleen said, look, I'm really tired of the film industry. It's as misogynistic and as full of bullshit as concert and unfortunately even theater had been for her. So she said, I'm going to learn 3D animation and maybe get into film post-production. And I'm like, well, that sounds cool. I want to know about that. So we did this 14-week course in Softimage, which was a very popular 3D program back in the late 90s. And we started our own business. And we're like, okay, well, maybe we can make children's animated television shows. So we made a couple pilots. We're doing that. And then I got a call from a dear friend who's now passed, an incredible lighting designer, Rick Belzer. And Belzer called me and he's like, oh, Boob, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know, Rick, what are you doing? He's like, oh, we're working on this show for Selena. It's a tribute show called Selena Forever. And we hear that you're now a video designer. Because somehow Rick had conflated me learning about 3D animation with being a video designer. He's like, we got all this gear, but no one knows what they're doing, and we don't know what to do. So so Colleen's like, you're out of your mind. Don't touch it. It sounds like a disaster. Don't go. But I'm like, oh, it's Rick. I love Rick. And this sounds interesting. So I packed up that workstation and I went down to San Antonio. And the day I arrived, I witnessed the director have a fist fight with the production manager over the production table. Then I went out to the bathroom and I threw up. And I said, okay, how do I do this? And from a technical standpoint, it seemed accessible. There were things that looked like dimmers. There were things, and they were playback devices, right? They were do-re-mi's. And there were show control systems, and that felt like a lighting console, which I knew how to program, right? And then there were projectors, and those felt like fixtures, right? So I'm like, okay, I can assimilate this stuff. I started frantically reading manuals. I figured out how to program the do-re-mi's. And then I had this workstation, and I started just cranking out content. And the producers were just horrified and stunned that the gear hadn't showed up with the content in it. Which I think seems to be a common misconception to this day. But we figured that out. And the show was terrible. It was horrendous. It was a giant learning experience. The show itself crashed and burned and closed after about 2 weeks of being open. But just as we finished it, we got a call from the producers of Footloose, the tour, and they said, we hear that you're the new big projection designer. So we subsequently did like 5 productions of Footloose, and then we did some more musicals, and then we ended up working with Seattle Opera doing a production of Parsifal. And we wanted to do this big blended projection backdrop, and the people at Scharf Weisberg were like, you're out of your mind. You can't do that. You can't blend projectors on multiple axes. You have these problems. And Colleen and I said, we think that's okay. We'll fix it in the content. So we did this big 50 by 80 backdrop with like 13 feet of throw, like back in 2003. 8 projectors. Robert Israel was the scenic designer, and I think Dwayne Schuler was the LD. No, Michael Habowski. And it was amazing. It was a giant breakthrough show for us. It was incredible. And this is, I'll try to wrap the story up at this point, just by bringing it into this landing. Then what happened is, we had a system of lights on that show to back the projectors up with gobos if there was a problem. And the guy who was programming those lights said, hey, I've got this rock band I work with. This was back in 2003. And they need a production design, and they want it really visually driven. They want to really use projection or video. And would you guys talk to them? And so now, hang on to your commentary about that, but this band was Nickelback, right? So back in 2003, I ended up being the production designer for Nickelback when they first started. Kind of.
That's not far from U2, right? I mean...
So the gift that gave us was suddenly we had this we accidentally, in a way, had found ourselves in this discipline. And then we started to diversify where we were practicing it. So we were doing opera. We continued to do operas. We were doing theater. We continued to do theater. We got into concert design and started doing a lot of concert design. And then we got into broadcast and then ultimately into brand activations. Because as the language of these kind of productions tilted more and more to the use of multimedia, we just found that there was all of this suddenly there was all of this application of it, and it was application where, in the past on a concert tour, the only thing that happened on video was cameras. So nobody in that ecosystem understood from an artistic standpoint how to think about video. So we had the benefit and the antecedents of having come from theater and understood how that worked in a design sense from theater. And I had the advantage of sitting next to a bunch of incredible designers and learning how they think. So even though I didn't get to attend a postgraduate program to learn about design, I got to sit next to Hal Binkley and Peter Kazarowski and Natasha Katz and, David Gallo, and I've been at the tech table and been part of those conversations, back when I was a lighting programmer. So I had always listened very carefully during those situations because I was obsessed with this. So we ended up with this really diverse practice. I would categorize us as very tech first, Steve. You know, you were talking about this sort of bifurcation between designers who think technically and who don't. Maybe it's because I came from being a head electrician. You know, it seems inconceivable to me that I wouldn't draft a projection plot and pick the gear and have an understanding of how those choices were going to impact the expressions I might have available to me. So that's just the vector that I came from. You know, the flip side is that I was working very hard throughout that whole process to make up for the deficiency of my educational background.
It's a really fascinating trajectory, because it touches on the question that I hear a lot. Oh, I'm a student and I want to be a fill in the blank in theater or in some other entertainment industry. Should I go get a graduate degree? And I think that, you know, I think it's clear that it's horses for courses. You know, so for some people it's exactly the right thing to do. For other people, it may not be. So I want to come back to this once we hear from all three of you. Wendall, can we jump to you for a second? I suppose I could fill in more blanks on your career than maybe any other of our panelists, so I'll try to keep my mouth shut.
Well, I mean, after hearing the boys talk about all of the, you know, hard work and technology and the small shows and the fact that I started on Broadway makes me want to say, well, I just slept my way to the top. Which is not true at all, okay? Because I'm the idiot who came to the theater by standing on the wrong street corner at the right time. I had absolutely no intention of working in the theater. It was not my dream. I'm still not sure. You know, there's always a chance there's another gig out there for me, and this is not it. So I've had several lifetimes in and around working in the theater. So, you know, my origination story is that, you know, a number one college dropout, but it was the 60s. So going to college was a very different situation. I was an emancipated minor. Nobody was paying for me to go to school. And I was always what you would call arty. I was the arty kid. And I had the 1 year I spent in college, I had a terrific relationship with my art history professors who let me audit. I audited Leo Steinberg at Hunter College for years, and I feel like I owe any skill I have in what I do. I owe to that time that I spent with him, learning about symbolism, and so I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I got jobs that you get. I got jobs as a typist in a theater in a film company, so that I would hang around at night after my typing gig to work the sound stages. And I'm going to say things that are terrifically sexist, and I wish were no longer true. However, the way that you learned anything technical in those days was you hung out with the guys, and you bought drinks, you brought donuts, whatever it was. But I would do my 9 to 5, and then I would work. I would hang out until 11, going to get beers and watching how things worked. And I began to understand a certain amount of things. And when I lost my job in the film place where I was a typist, because of an intervention by the FBI, but that's another story. And a really good one, and someday in the movie version, I'll tell it all. Anyway, I went to work for another filmmaker whose name is François de Menil. And the great thing about François de Menil was a very close friend of the Warhol gang. So this was, I'm going to say 1969, something like that. And, I'm making experimental films, learning how to cut, learning how to do sound. When you're the girl, you carry the heaviest piece of equipment, because that's what you just look for the heaviest piece and you say, I'll take that. And you make yourself essential. You make coffee, you roll joints. That's what I did. And so that I did that for a while. And then in my trajectory for me was I wanted to be a filmmaker. And then in 1970, there was a thing that was called a recession. And there was no work. I've been doing PA work, picking up gigs here and there. And, you could, for unemployment in those days living in Manhattan, The maximum unemployment was $65 a week. My rent was $65 a month. It's the perfect storm. You can actually be an artist. So I would do that. I ended up in LA with a boyfriend at that time and tried to get in the movie business. Nothing for girls. No chance that any female was going to get any gig anywhere doing anything in the movie business between 1971 and 1973. So I came back to New York. I got a job in advertising, literally because a friend of mine bet me that I could get this job. Was no chance. I had no clue what I was going to do. Somebody circled something in the New York Times and said, you can get this job. You bet me dinner. And I got the damn job. How to buy them dinner. So I got the damn job. But at the damn job, which was a small ad agency, you know, they did commercials and they did, and I had a film background. So it was like, you kid with the film background, you produced the commercials. Then they did slideshows, what we called in those days, industrial theater. There were famous things like the Milliken Breakfast Show, slide projectors, you know, dancing lazy boy chairs. Can you see it now? Happy fibers, you know, to the, you know, whatever. I didn't know anything about slides. So you have to learn. How do you learn? You hang out 8 to midnight with the boys. And that's what I did. I found the guys at Staging Techniques. They would show me how things worked. I went to a camera place. They showed me how things worked. So I'm a quick study. And I figured it out, and I would put on all these slideshows. So hanging out with the guys at Staging Techniques was like the ETC and the, you know, they were in New York in the 70s. They were sort of the big rental house for projectors. And the people who owned the company were theater people to begin with, who had gone into you know, they learned how to make money doing industrial theater. So one of them was Bill Batchelder. Bill Batchelder had been Jeannie Rosenthal's lighting assistant. Anybody know Jeannie Rosenthal? Jeannie Rosenthal, huzzah, huzzah. You know, he had been stage manager for, yes, exactly. He had been stage manager for Martha Graham Company. So, you know, you hang out, you're buying beers, you're hearing all this stuff. One day, Batch calls me and says, Theron Musser wants some slides. I don't know Theron Musser from, you know, a lamppost. But I know how to make slides at that point, and I know how to make something that is brand new at this moment, which is what we would call bottom lit, and that is that you're photographing slides with the light from below. Now everybody understands that. So I meet this nice gray-haired lady who's carrying her dry cleaning into her apartment, and she rolls out a light plot. To this day, children, I cannot read a light plot, okay? 40 years on, it still looks, you know, like how hieroglyphic, you know, and here's this, like, she's rolling out this light plot and she's explaining to me what it is that she wants to do. And I have the good enough sense to understand what she's trying to do. And I make her slides. Basically what she was doing was she was testing out the idea for the color wheel. And what she needed was pure color. And that what she needed was perfection. Perfection is something I'm very good at. And so I made these slides for her. They were perfect. They did exactly what she needed to do. She hung some projectors from the ceiling. She pointed them at the ground. She proved her point. It was for a show called Ballroom. Projectors were cut. They were not there to do anything but answer a question for Theron in a place in Connecticut, I seem to remember.
Stratford, yeah. Stratford, yeah. Connecticut. Yep.
So that, you know, I thought, okay, that was it. Nice. And then I get a call from Doug Schmidt, who says, Theron Musser says, I need to meet you. So I meet Doug Schmidt, and he said, well, first of all, I thought you were a man. And because of the Wendall. And then so I surprised him. And he was doing They're Playing Our Song, which was a musical for Broadway, Neil Simon book, Marvin Hamlish, Carol Bayer Sager. I just want you to know, I have never been inside a theater at this point in time, ever. I have been, everything I know about the theater, I learned from watching Busby Berkeley movies. Fred Astaire is the person who I understand theater from. I read plays. I loved plays. I read plays all the time. And I went to school in New York. But, you know, I went to Shakespeare in the Park. It was free. That was what theater I saw. I put on Macbeth in my little girls' school. I myself was Macbeth. Not lady, Macbeth, girls' school. So I had an interest, but no access. And I wasn't being driven to do this. I'm just, you know, I'm like trying to put food on the table and taking care of myself and following my nose one place or another. And meanwhile, I have over my lifetime, whether I'm blessed by God or the stars, I have always seemed to have access to interesting and important people. And I just get lucky like that. And if I could give you one piece of advice, it would be get luck, because I'm very lucky. I don't fuck it up. That's also an important part of it. You don't take that for granted. If you get lucky, it's like you put your head down and you do the work. So Doug Schmidt has this idea for They're Playing Our Song, which involves a lot of projectors. Doesn't scare me. I know how to animate. I know how the projectors work. I am not a programmer. I am not interested in technology. I am only interested in what technology can do. Over my lifetime, I've learned how to do certain things in order to do certain things. My advice about technology to anybody who wants to be a designer is learn enough, nobody can lie to you. That's all you have to know. There's always somebody better who can do the technology. If you're a designer, keep your eye on the stage. That's my female perspective. So I go out to, I'm still working in advertising, and I take a few weeks because I'm going to spend what seemed to be 10 days in Los Angeles putting on They're Playing a Song. 16 slide projectors, xenographic slide projectors. I don't even want to explain what that is, but the Dissolve worked with a mirror, and that was how the fades came. I was animating these images so quickly that the mirrors flew off the projectors because it was not built to be doing the thing that I was doing. So that we ended up driving to Azusa to explain to the manufacturer, if you'd like put a little cotter pin in here, this could be a good tool. And they did. And then we opened on Broadway, and, we bought a whole bunch of them, and some electrician left them on overnight. And killed 16 xenographic projectors, but that's another story and not that interesting.
I was there.
Yeah. That was pretty interesting. And, power of the union, that guy still worked after that. So I always was impressed with the union for that. So here I am. I'm doing a Broadway musical. I don't know anything about anything, but I figured out very quickly that whatever work was going on was not about what I was doing, that I had to work in the downtime in order to not stop the flow of things. I intuited what was important. Oh, and the other hilarious thing was that Lucy Arnaz was the star for that. And Lucy and I went to high school together. And boy, was she pissed when she saw me, because she thought she was all that. But we went to a fancy private school in Manhattan together. Anyway, so we did They're Playing Our Song. I ended up staying there for many weeks because they kept changing their mind about what the show was about. And I came back and I quit my job in advertising because I found what I was always looking for, and that was the kind of collaboration where you don't understand who's doing what. In advertising, it's like look what I did. I've never been interested in what I can do. I'm really interested in making this whole thing. So every night after tech, you go out and this is how you learn. You go out and there's people are buying rounds and rounds of drinks and they're backing you up, and there's 14 drinks behind. I don't hardly drink at all. I'm of that other generation. We don't do alcohol. And, so it's like, Bob Curry and everybody's buying you drinks. And then, one story leads to another, and you're hearing all these stories from Theron and Doug Schmidt and, fascinating people. And then at some point, Theron will say, that thing that goes into that sucks. What are we going to do about that? And she's talking about basically a cross. Somebody's walking from here to there. And then you've got 5 people, and they're all saying, and the winch guy is there, and the guy, has got the front light is there. And everybody is like trying to say, well, if that happened, this happened, that happened, this happened, and then you did this and you did that. And the next day you would do it, and you would change a transition from 14 seconds to 12 and a half seconds. Huzzah. And you just felt, that's what I want to do. I want to become part of this invisible, beautiful thing where there's no ownership. Nobody walks around and says, hey, I did that. No, nobody knows. Nobody cares. Everybody is rowing the boat. I thought I found heaven. I quit my job in advertising, and I thought, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. So children, that was 1979. 78. It opened on Broadway in 79. I did not make a living in the theater until 1994. So I'm just putting that out there for you so you understand. I didn't starve to death in between, but I could not fully make a living working as a designer in the theater. And I did mostly Broadway. I mean, there wasn't anybody else. It wasn't like I'm so special or anything. Who else was stupid enough to do it? It was a handcraft in those days. It was like even tapestries. It was so much work. Only women would do it. No man was stupid enough to. You know how many slides there are in Tommy? You know how many slides were thrown out of Tommy? 10,000. So nobody would do that. My whole studio was women. And so, it's like I just did the work, as they said. I did the work that came in front of me. I never said no, which was a problem. There was a year I did 22 different productions. I mean, I had a staff of women who were fantastic, but I was like, you could have slipped me in an envelope. And meanwhile, I got 2 kids. I have 2 children. I have, there's roadkill of husbands. There's just a box of them around here somewhere. Who's paying attention? It's like, you got 5 minutes. The kids get it all. And then I never worked in the summer. So that was, that's the other fantastic joke because, I was asked to do The Lion King. And my agent at the time, I said, Helen, what do? I don't work in the summer. It's teching in the summer. And she says, oh, long after that director is dead, your kids will be writing books. Don't do that show. I'm totally fine not doing that show. In fact, I've never seen that show. I understand it has actually no projections now, except the one piece that Julie Taymor stole from a production that we did together in Italy, but that's another story. So that's my origination story. There's a gazillion shows. You just do one thing in front of another. I did a lot of Broadway. I did a lot of regional theater. I've done a ton of opera. And now I'm doing almost only dance because it's what I want to do. I'm kind of fed up with what goes on Broadway. I think I did a show in 1999 that was so debilitating and so depressing and so inartistic that I quit. So in 1999, I told my agent I'm stopping for at least a year. And I stayed home with my kids and put them on the school bus and did that for a year. And, that kind of pretty much changed the trajectory of my life because a lot of people got very angry with me for doing that. Have your life. It all works out okay. So it's like the things that I missed don't seem really to matter. There's loyalty, lack of loyalty. There's a lot of heartbreak, in all of this. But in the end, what's the thing I care about? I'm still a picture junkie. All I do is look at pictures. I watch movies. The thing, if I would talk about the education that I got, was that since I didn't get to go to college, I did 2 things that I think are really important, and I will offer that to you. And that is during a spell of unemployment, I went to the Elgin Cinema every day. That's what's now the Joyce. The Elgin Cinema changed the movie every day. They went through the Janus Film Festival from one end to the next. I saw you would go in, it would be a double feature or sometimes a triple feature. I'd be there at 1:00 when they opened. I had my own seat. The same, I was there when they opened. I went to the same place, sat in the same place all the time. And I filled my brain with imagery. I am still drawing on the bank of that imagery. And now I'm like showing all these movies to my partner who is not a person who watched movies. And it's like, oh, brave new world. And I'm just saying, I can't believe you don't know this? You haven't seen Virgin Spray? What, you haven't seen it? Here, let me show you. Here, Bergman, all day, all night. Go fill your head with as much cinema as you can, because that is where we are born. And if you study anything about the history of projection design, which I have spent many, many years researching. And someday, maybe if I sit down, I will actually write that book. And the other thing that I did was I went to the Bonniol Library in New York City. And at those days, you could take out records. They were like these plastic things. They were black, they went round and round. And I would take out the maximum records you could take out, which was 6. And my only rule was I had to not know what it was. And I took them 6 and I found the craziest stuff. And but I couldn't get this education anyplace else. If I had gone to school, it would not have been this random. And I discovered so many things. So I would say the most important thing anybody needs for life, but certainly for a designer, is curiosity and an insatiable hunger for something you don't know anything about. And that I got. And, I'm the one who goes to the restaurant and orders that thing that nobody knows what it is on the menu. Half the time I got to spit it out, but I have to know. It's like, octopus parmigiana. Maybe that'll be great. Mostly it's not. But if you don't try it, how will you know? So that's, I don't know, Steve, you can fill in the rest of the blanks. I dated a lot of guys to see their shows. I dated Rick Belzer so that I could see Sweeney, because he was assisting on Sweeney Todd. Shameless. I was shameless. So
I have 2 footnotes here as a charter member of the Wendall Harrington fan club. The 2 footnotes are: do not miss Googling Wendall Harrington USITT keynote address. Wendell Harrington USITT keynote address. Spend 15 minutes listening to this. It will change your life. That's number 1. Number 2, my most oft repeated Wendall Harrington statement talking about projection, and I'll tell it to anybody who will listen, and I give her Wendell attribution all the time, goes like this: just give them a smell of it. Just give them a smell of it. And if you go, when I go to lots of shows now where the projection gets out front and literally knocks me over in my seat, I feel like I've been forced into what Wendell would call an e-ticket ride, but has nothing to do with supporting the piece on stage. So do listen to that speech. Phil Villar has a question that he mentioned that he had probably 45 minutes ago. Phil, do you remember what it was? Because if so, have at it.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Good thing David asked me to type it out, so that way I would remember it. It's like a script for me. So to everybody here, I think a big question for me right now as a projection designer is kind of like figuring out the priorities between like creating my own content versus licensing content and open domain stuff, and just trying to kind of figure out like where my priorities are, because like, I don't have like a super tricked out laptop from, or a tricked out computer from Pixar Studios to create like meaningful images enough, so, and my second question would be is, how important is it when you're figuring out a media controller, like one that allows you to control on the fly different like hues and saturation, like something like Isadora, versus something like Watch Out, which is a lot more stable, but not as much control over assets post?
If I may be so humble as to reply to some of that, I would link to what Wendell said about technology when it comes to content, right? You need to know enough about what your vision is for content that your content artist can't lie to you, kind of, so to speak, right? I have certain content skills. I have a really great facility in the Adobe suite. And early on, as you heard, I learned how to use 3D programs. I am Captain Shaky Hands. So me and a camera, although now new cameras have in-body stabilization, and now I can finally take a picture that doesn't look like a triple exposure. But that said, Phil, I think on any big visual design that involves projection design, even under the best of circumstances, you may only have enough capacity to do X amount of that yourself. And I think that Wendall is right in that sense of like, she describes her relationship with technology and being able to be above it. Like your focus is on the art, right? And focus on the art doesn't necessarily have to mean focus on making your part. Your part of making the art, may be much more important that you're collaborating, you're thinking narratively, you're working with your other creators. And then after that, where does the content come from? Maybe there's some parts of that you're really good with and that you're passionate about, and that it probably makes sense for you to do. But then there's literally legions now of amazing content artists who are out there who you can lean into. Or you may also find just the right piece of stock footage, just the right piece of source material that does exactly what you need. As I've progressed in my career, I have had to acclimate myself to letting go of more and more and more of the tactical, and my designs have gotten better as I have been able to elevate above the actual nuts and bolts, both technically and creatively, in terms of the fabrication, right? And be able to see the big picture and constantly be thinking about the story and constantly thinking about who is this for and what shift of consciousness am I trying to create, right? And that's where I found my best value comes, especially because now I've found content artists who are way better than me. Like, I can talk to them about the picture I want to see, and they come back and I'm like, I couldn't even conceive of going to that level, but yes, that is exactly what I want. I guess my advice there is to understand what you're good at, what value you can bring. That I still, to this day, on every show, I will find the thing that I somehow feel a compulsion that I need to do, and I'll probably go make that thing. But 90% of all the content, I'm working very closely with other people who are making it. And if early in your career, the other part of this is early in your career, because of assets, because of budgets, it might become contingent on you being able to do it. And that maybe you don't have the budget to have an army of content people or to buy a bunch of stock. And that can be the way it is early in your career. I'm very fond of saying that early in a career, the answer should be almost always yes. Later in a career, the answer should probably almost always be no. So as Wendall said, she said yes to everything, and I did too. But now I say no to almost everything. And because I'm really trying to do the projects where I can make a difference and where I'm passionate about it. So that's, yeah.
Great. And a related question, which Jake asked earlier on. Jake, why don't you ask that question out loud here?
The two questions. So the question I asked earlier was actually when Jeff was talking earlier. And I was asking if you find it more fulfilling personally to do technical work or design work, or if you kind of place those evenly. Because I know a lot of people look at technical work as having its own creativity to it and problem solving. And the second question I had actually relates more to what Wendall was talking about. How do you get people to take those risks when you just walk into a building and say, like, this is what I really want to do? I've never done this before, but I want to do it. And will you help me? Do you think that's still something that happens in our era that we're going into?
Can I do this first?
Yeah, go ahead, Wen.
Here's the thing. It's difficult because you sort of have to build that bond of trust. And I'm gotten, now I'm so damn old. People just seem to trust me because my hair is like colored. But what you want to do is you want to try to build relationships as best you can. And prove to, somebody asked me a while ago about, how do you get to have the respect of the people that you work with? You get up earlier, you leave later, you put your head down, you do the work, which I know sounds awfully simple, but is really, really hard. And I feel that my experience has been, I'm very passionate about what I do. Sometimes that works great. And some people just love that. And there are directors and choreographers that I work with who have come to value that. And those are the collaborators that I value. But it doesn't always work for everybody. And I'm going to say it's different being a woman because there's this different kind of competition, and working with men is still sadly, problematic. So you have to find those things that prove to people that you have the energy and the will to do it. And I think that if you, it's impossible to predict because you don't know who's on the other side. But the thing is, if you trust yourself, you will make that thing happen. And sometimes you have to make an experiment. I'm working a lot with the Miami City Ballet, and I love Lourdes Lopez. She's the artistic director. And I've done a number of things for her. And I have this idea that they ought to do a Firebird. The Balanchine Firebird cannot leave New York City Ballet because the set is too priceless. It's made by Chagall. So that means that it can never be performed outside of New York. So I said to Lourdes, I have this idea. I would like to do it at Miami City Ballet. I'm asking somebody to put up $1 million for an idea that I have. And it's just, what's ridiculous? Who the fuck am I to be saying these things? And she was like interested. And I said, okay, I will design it. I will bring in a designer and we will, over the summer, design it, bring it to you, because it has to be presented to the Balanchine Trust to get them to say, yes, you can do this. And so I took the risk. The set designer also took the risk, and we did it. And we performed it last March. So, and it was kind of a huge success for no other reason really than it's not you could see it in Florida as opposed to in New York. But sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to invest yourself. And I know that there's a lot of people who are afraid about giving ideas away. And people are always cautioning me about that. And I always say, I got 6 more where that came from. And I don't ever really, it's like, I'm never, you're going to steal my idea? Good luck. You'll never, okay, great, you can't be me. Only you can make the work that you can make. They can take the shape of it. I've seen plenty of things that look like my work. Fine, God bless. If somebody else can make a buck, good luck. Really, what am I doing here? I'm just here to put the seeds in the ground and watch them grow. The money thing has stopped being a issue. It's different, because you're young. And trust me, if I didn't have a teaching gig right now, I would not be quite so angry. But that's what you have to do. You have to believe in yourself, because if you show that self-belief, people will trust you. That you say, I may not know how to do this right now, right this second, but when I'm in it, I am going to figure my way through it. And that is the way that everybody in the theater works. So they would understand that, and they would see your commitment, and that would matter.
But that's an interesting. We'll come to you in a minute, Jeff, about Jake's earlier question. But that's an interesting balance, Wendall, because believing in yourself and being able to convince others, while still being a mensch that people want to work with, right? In other words, it's not about a turning on your self-promotion program. It's doing the work. I think it's doing the work in a way that speaks for itself. So I'm
terrible at self-promotion. That I'm not very good at all. But I do have a lot of faith in myself, and maybe it's just because I got through a lot of shit. You know, so it's like you build on your experience. I mean, my friend Steve Terry threw me under the bus in San Francisco, and I lived, and we're still friends. So
you had to bring that up, right? You had to bring it up. Right?
They don't know the detail, but it's like you have these endless baptisms by fire, water, and chainsaw. You get through them, and you make one tiny miracle. I tell my students, if you get 14 seconds out of anything that you do that makes your heart fill up, done deal. That's all you get. If that's all you get, it's a gift beyond rubies. And you don't know which 14 seconds it's going to be, but you're going to, there's going to be not bad. And it's also, it's never over, darlings. I take notes opening nights. Opening night, I got pages and pages of notes because you don't know anything until the audience comes in. And with ballet, you don't have previews. You have an opening, an audience comes, and you just can hear them if they're in it or if they're not. So that's the drive. If you show that drive, people will trust you. And I'm also going to say, I hope this is true forever. Don't stay in your lane. Have an opinion. Notice what the director is doing. Be aware of what the costumes are doing. Watch the colors. Watch the shapes. Talk to the lighting designer. Ask the lighting designer, put light on top of the media. Always, always, always. And, that kind of thing will make you can't be separate. You have to be in it. I'm sorry if I cut you off, and I didn't mean, Stephen, to throw you under the bus because I still love you.
I'd much rather listen to you on any subject, even me throwing you under the bus, right? but Jeff, how about Jake's earlier question about the technology versus the art?
I mean, yeah, I think for me, I love making things with my hands, which ties back to Phil's question about making content and media servers and everything. It's all kind of intertwined for me. If I do a show on Broadway, I'm not making any of that content. I'm drawing things on yellow pads and handing them to somebody else, and they're taking my scribbles and making them into something. I definitely have opinions on version 14 of that stuff, but I'm not making that, but at the same time, there's plenty of show. I did a show a long time ago, but we wanted a giant light wall that moved, right? So we took vinyl sheets, sewed them together with an industrial sewing machine, put them on two 20-foot long tubes that you'd pour concrete in. What are those? I can't remember what those are called. And then spun that around with an exercise bicycle, and that was the side light onto the stage. And then I had a little camera that was shooting on a tripod at a flip book of pictures that I wanted to project onto the deck, And so I'd either drawn things or I'd photocopied them and I pointed the camera at that. And that was the image for every scene. And so it's like, how much did that cost me? Nothing. So I think in answer to the technical things, it was a huge move for me when I started using a media server that I don't know how to program, because I don't fucking look at that thing anymore. Like people have said, I look up at the stage, and that's where my eyes should be. When I'm 25 years old and designing a show for $500, I can't afford to do all that. So for me, Isadora was a great tool to use in rehearsal. And if I was running the show myself, I wouldn't fucking hand Isadora to somebody else to run a show, because it's not going to work. So use a different media server to run a show, but use Isadora to dork around and make stuff and build things that you've never been able to build because you don't have all night to go and make it and then bring it back. So those are the kinds of things for me. It's like, What do I have? Okay, do I have time and people and money? Great. Do I not? Great. Okay. You say you want 6 projectors and we've got $1,000. Well, guess what? We're not going to get 6 projectors. Guess what's going to make everybody's life a lot easier? Maybe we use 6 TVs and we have an idea that we can actually fucking do. Let's not spend $1,000 failing at an idea that's impossible. Melanie, doesn't mean you can't do crazy stuff, but but yeah, anyway, so.
Melanie, I think you had an earlier question. Have at it.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I practically know nothing about projection design. So I'm wondering if we could just backtrack a little bit. My school doesn't have a program from it, and as far as I can understand, it's still emerging. It's not as structured as what we see lighting as, and in lighting we know that there's a production electrician, a master electrician, a designer, like everyone has their roles. So I'm wondering if you could go through the typical way that you start the process of projection design, and I'm just curious to know the difference between, we've talked about a lot, like the technical aspects and then the content creation, and how you source that content, or how you decide if you might do it, if that's a thing, or if someone else is going to do it, just maybe going through all of that.
Bob, what do you have to say about that?
Well, it's a great question, Melanie. When you figure it out, let me know. I say that half because it's like, in my entire career in doing this, and I've largely been acting as a projection designer now since, at least the last 20 years. There is not necessarily a uniform nomenclature or terminology for what we do. And the different disciplines, like if we look at theater versus, brand activation, which is the fancy new word for what Wendall was referring to as industrial theater, to broadcast, to concert, the terminologies shift. In broadcast, a projection designer is probably known as a screens producer. And the screens producer acts as the artistic arbiter of these things. And then there's a whole realm of technical people under them. In theater, you're a projection designer, oddly enough, regardless of whether there is actually a projector in the building. When I did Catch Me If You Can for Broadway, I was the projection designer, despite the fact that we used only LED screens. And that's part of that oddity of that nomenclature. So there's an interesting diversity of the terminologies. But what it boils down to is typically you have somebody who is the primary moving force behind the art, right? The vision, the visuals, the outcomes. Then it's very typical to have a person who is primarily responsible for the technology. Some people call those an engineer in charge or an EIC. Others might call them a lead projectionist. Again, the vernacular shifts, right? But typically there's a person in charge of that pile of tech. Usually in between, there's a programmer. That seems to be a title that we all are able to agree on. And that programmer is often a key collaborator with you if you're driving the art, because they are the person who is literally, they have their hands on the controls for what is going to happen with the content. So that relationship between me and my programmer is critical. And you tend to see so many of the usual suspects when I work. It's very typical for me that I'll have a programmer that I've worked with a great deal who just understands my shorthand, understands where I'm going to be going, knows before I've even said it, that the next thing that's going to happen is this. So from and then underneath the person in charge of that technology, you've got all kinds of people. You've got media server techs, you've got projectionists who set up the projections, you've got LED wall technicians. You might have camera people, you might have shaders who are the people who sit backstage and receive the camera feeds and tune up their color correction before they get rebroadcast. You might have someone on a switcher whose only job is to switch cameras. There are many different ways that a video design can manifest with live content versus pre-recorded content. And that shows itself in both the lineup of people who do that and in the kinds of equipment that do it.
So that's great. Good.
Can I just put this in school terms just
Yes.
to help you out? Because I teach school. And that is, there's a designer. That's where the ideas come from. They either make their media or they have maybe a content assistant. So you can have in schools, and I know because like everybody is starting a projection program first, that what they're trying to call it, whether they're trying to call it media creation or projection. I'm sticking with the word projection, even when it's LED, because I come to that from the turn of the century and I'm hanging on to it. So you have the designer, you have a content creator, which is sometimes this designer, sometimes it's their best friend. Then you have a programmer who takes your media and puts it into whatever system you have to get it up on the stage. Sometimes that programmer serves as an engineer who will help you figure out where the projector goes, what the beams are, what the lenses is. But you need somebody who is that technical interface between you as a designer who has a vision and where does the projector go? How much light do you need? How big is the beam? All that chazarai. That's the more technical position, though those two things overlap and you need to have them. But those are the three general things. There's a designer, the one who's collaborating with all of the other designers and having the conversations with the director and translating that into content. Now, whether you, like Jeff, have to stay up all night and make it yourself, or you're able to buy it, or you're able to con one of your friends into helping you out, content is created. Content into some kind of tool that puts it out there into the world, whatever that tool may be. And that tool can be PowerPoint, perfectly reasonable programming tool. So
Good.
Hopefully that is just the simple answer.
Good.
Okay.
By the way, I just have to say one other thing, and it's one of my favorites. The name during the period that Wendall described with her and her female staff cranking out projects, the name of her studio has got to be one of the greatest studio names of all time. Mom's Idea Hut.
It's still that. Still Mom's here.
Okay. Slew Stone, you have a question, I believe.
Hello, everyone. I do have a question. So my question is kind of along the same lines. Like several years ago, I learned Pandora through the USITT Elite Training Program. Later, I got some training in Isadora. My latest university, we did Watch Out. And I know that like QLab now has some projection software too to it. So, but there's like, how do I learn more than just the little snippets that I've found? Because there's, so many programs, so many schools are just now getting into it that, and now that I'm done with school, it's hard for me to find resources on where to continue learning because there's so many, it's such a new aspect of theater that, there's not really any guidelines for any of this.
Almost all of the manufacturers offer a certain amount of training if technical training is what you want. Watch Out has many institutes and and seminars and stuff like. If you want to be a programmer, then it makes sense to keep up with all those things. If you want to be a designer, it's a different path, and the choice of what it used to be that Watch Out was coin of the realm on Broadway. Now Disguise is coin of the realm on, and it's like everything is exactly only going to be this until next Tuesday when it's only going to be something else until somebody has, discovered a tool. I went through the Pani and Pigi time, the nightmare on Broadway, which was, beautiful. And we learned how to program all kinds of cockamamie things courtesy of Steve Terry. But then it was over. So, it really depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a programmer, you got to keep up. If you want to be a designer, it's a different path. It's a lot of digital information that you may not actually need. So it depends on what you.
Well said. Michael Rathbun, you have a question.
Yeah, actually, specifically, Wendell, you mentioned something that almost that made me think that you were suggesting that you generally like to overlay traditional lighting instruments onto projections. Are you down to expand a little bit?
You bet. If I'm doing rear projection, I always ask the lighting designer to put a pipe of lights upstage, because I think it's really helpful to put a little light into the projected image, which I know sounds counterintuitive, but it actually takes the projected image, which is flat and heinous. I hate nothing more than a rear projection screen because it's so flat, but it pushes the picture forward. It's crazy, but it works. They have to, of course, the color has to be correct and has to be gentle, and you have to be working with a genius like Jim Ingalls or, Robert Wurtzel or one of the other boys that I have broken. And they can actually take the color, they're watching my color and putting a little light into the bottom or the top of it. It takes it away from that, my travel, my pictures of my Hawaiian vacation, which is always what I think of when I see a big RP screen. And from the front, same thing applies. So you're trying to push a little light into the projected image. Now, of course, it means that I need to have some juice to make that happen. But what it does is it eats away at that squareness, at that edge. And that always makes it feel more like it's like breathing. And again, it really matters to be one eye. And that, lighting and projection, if you are not cohabitating on that stage, it's not going to work. If your color temperatures are off, if you're not really looking at what the other is doing. And I find that, I know, like I said, it's counterintuitive. Trust me, it's fabulous.
So in other sessions that we've done as part of this program, someone has asked, what professionals, what do you look for when you're hiring assistants, staff, perhaps programmers? What kind of attributes do you look for? What do you guys have to say about that?
Go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
Well, it kind of goes back to what Wendell talked about a little bit ago about you got to show up before me, you got to stay later than me. And, if I'm sticking around to work during the break, you are too. And it's a little like that. I don't want to work with assholes. And I don't want to work with people that don't listen. I always encourage new people that I've never worked with before. I said, if you don't know what I'm talking about, or if you don't know how to do what I'm asking you to do, you have to tell me. There's nothing that gets me more annoyed than you going off and pretending like you know how to do some shit, and then coming back in a half an hour and saying, I actually don't know. Not knowing is perfectly fine. There's plenty of shit that none of us know how to do. So that's really important. And then just willing to be a team player, wanting to get in there and wanting to give ideas. I don't need somebody who's like, what do I do next? What do I do next? What do I do next? It's like, go do something, show it to me. I don't have, when I draw that stupid shit on the yellow pad, it should come back as a better idea. And that's my hope. And just to cut back really briefly to what Melanie was asking about, what is this? As far as the design process, the thing that you have on your wall behind you, Melanie, is great. The first time I saw a costume designer's mood board, I think is what they call those things, I was like, ooh, I want that. That thing is useful. shows palette, it shows idea, it shows graphic, like all those things. Like that's what you need to be able to show people, to say, here's the idea, here's what it's going to feel like. It's not done, but this is the gesture. Yeah, that's it.
Anybody else on what they look for in an assistant or a staff member?
No, I think what Jeff said is correct. You really want to have someone who's curious, also hopefully cheerful and not bitter. And, well, it's really hard because it's so easy for me to get into a bad mood and be sort of frustrated by the situation. I don't need anybody else to be in a bad mood. It's my bad mood. I own it. And, it's your job to, say, oh, he's not as big a schmuck as you think he is, or some such, discourse, or bring chocolate.
Wendell and I we shared an assistant at one point who was a chronic sire.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a commentary, but boy, did it seem like it. And I think both of us separately were like, you got to stop sighing, dude. Like, I know that's just some kind of reaction that you do, but it's not helping the situation. And you work with somebody new and they're going to fucking fire you because it seems like you don't want to be here. So
it speaks a little bit to how I've had to adjust myself to relationships. Because look, programmers are doing a really hard job, right? They have to interface directly with this complex technological beast, right? And they're working simultaneously. They've had to split their brain in half to deal with me and my artistic rambling, which hopefully is actually not rambling. It's coherent and specific, and oftentimes I'm trying to paint a picture that I'm hoping they're going to grab. And then the other half of their brain is trying to deal with the lights and the knobs and the faders and the feedback and the error messages and the inevitable. And a lot of those men and women who do that, like I work with a particular programmer who's a woman, and you might think that she has some kind of form of Tourette's because she's like got the filthiest mouth while she's programming. And I'm like, Kat, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, why? I'm like, I don't know. You're sitting there going, fuck, 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 like, that's just her inner dialogue as she's kind of working her way through wrestling this big pile of technology to the ground and trying to manifest the art that I've given her. And I have found, and maybe this is just the kind of people that end up gravitating to me, I have found that the programmers can be a bit like a sensitive race car or like they're high performance people with a very specific capacity to buffer information that's coming from me and to feed it to the technology. And often they are prickly and they are pushy and they are also lovely, right? And so you might, some of my programmers, you might say, oh, they feel like they're maybe a little on the spectrum. And maybe they are, but therein lies, their own particular overlay of their personality onto the genius that they bring to the thing. And so what I look for, I look beyond that, and I look for trust, and I look for really deep listening, and do they, is what I'm giving them being manifested into what I see in my mind's eye? If that's happening, you can have Tourette's all day long.
Okay, guys, so we're about an hour and 40 minutes into this, so I think we've just about come to the magic end of our program. I just want to thank everybody, students and panelists. This has been a fascinating discussion. And
wow, amazing, guys. You guys are an amazing panel. I just am honored to listen to you, and definitely in all your fan clubs. Wendell, you got to start a podcast or something, though. That was,
well, I don't know if you saw the chat box. Somebody put on the chat box, Wendell, can you please record a motivational podcast series?
Yeah,
here's what I will do. I won't do that, but I will tell you. As I said, I have two kids, and one of my daughters, every time that you would have a test or something that she would be afraid of, before they went out the door, I would sing in my best Ethel Merman, You'll be swell. So I would recommend that everybody get a recording of Merman telling you you'll be swell, you'll be great. You put it on your phone, and you're like, so she keeps it, and she says, Mom, I'm going in for the interview. I'm playing the song. So you get yourself a little Merman, you keep it in your pocket, you take it as needed.
I love it.
Great.
I want to congratulate Jeff Sugg. I want to congratulate Jeff Sugg on a recent Tony nomination as well, I think. So,
yeah.
Congratulations.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's like not a downtown thing, is it? Oh, I just got nominated for a Tony Award. That's a long way from the downtown roots, right?
Yeah, that was not in the 5-year plan.
Right.
Hey, Phil, you trying to sink in with a question, buddy?
Yeah, I do. Sorry, because like for me, like this is great being like, because I'm a projection designer, but like my program doesn't officially have a projection design program, so I relied so much on like taking like digital art classes and like so many film other classes. So I want to take as much time as I can with this. For me, like I'm terrible with communications. English is not my first language, so for me, like I've always relied heavily on creating storyboards and renderings as a form of communicating. How often do you guys still do that? Like create storyboards and, renderings to send to directors or to even maybe illustrators and media content creators to be like, this is kind of what I'm looking at.
Every single time and at huge volume.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Always.
I always make storyboards. I make storyboards even if I'm not going to show them to anybody. I make storyboards for myself just to kind of keep it orderly for myself. But I think it's really important to, it's like Jeff was saying about the mood board idea that I talk in pictures. And because I don't make things myself with my hands so much anymore, it's very important to have this sort of be able to deal this deck of cards out in front of a director and find out what he responds to, so that you as opposed to saying, here's how I see it. It's like first thing it's like, here's one from column A, two from column B. So
you start
all about that.
And you start to understand how that director deals with visuals. Like, can they look at a sketch and understand what that means? Or do you need to show them like a rendering? I have many directors that I've worked with who you show a sketch and they're like, is that what it's going to be? No, that is completely not what it's going to be. So I will never show you a sketch again. I'll show you, like Wendall said, I'll show you stuff out of a magazine and we can say, okay, is that it? Is that it? Is that it? Or we'll show you a rendering that's fully done.
I think renderings are scary. Yeah. I think they start to believe things that are not true. So I show as little as possible. A little angle, sometimes a knee.
For me, like I
lean into the pencil sketch. I lean into pencil storyboards because sometimes if I show up with a photo real rendering, people get attached to stuff that I don't want them to get attached to. Right? So I'm like, no, here, I'm going to draw this with a pencil right in front of you. Do you mean something like this? And then they exactly Jeff. They're like, okay, they maybe can focus on the idea and not on the detail. So that's a very interesting discussion about the fidelity of those sort of pre-visual images and when in the process is the right time to increase that fidelity, to go from pencils to renderings to things. So.
Yeah, because I ended up having to, like, in my last semester or like the last year of grad school, I ended up like taking out from the library like The Illusion of Life by Disney Animation and like reading it cover to cover because like I was, for me, like, again, like when I started going into projection design and knowing that I need to make more than just really abstract images, I needed to be like, okay, I'm going to really need to be specific in what my objective is as a designer. So I ended up reading the cover to cover and it was amazing, but it was so incredibly daunting and intimidating as well, because it's like, I'm reading this book and this is like, oh my God, this is for like a whole team of animators. And yet I'm like, I can kind of make a slime effect out of Maya if you really want me to. It's just going to take me 2 days to render it.
Okay, you guys. Well, again, this has just been wonderful. Thank you, panelists, so very much for doing this. And I guess we're going to, the ultimate goal of this program is to connect some professionals with some students and get a mentorship thing going here. So that will unfold in the coming weeks here. And so, again, thanks everyone. And that's it for today.